I think that's it in terms of an introduction. I, that's it in terms of an introduction. So for the participants who are participating in the symposium and going to critique Tunde's book, this is an opportunity for you to hear from the author himself. I'm hoping at the end of the session we should be able to understand some of the questions Diana has raised. We should understand why the book came out at this point. What does it mean for this audience, which is a predominantly young audience. I think all of us should be in or most of us should be in our early 20s or mid 20s. Those are some of the questions we're just looking to understand. And it's also, we thought when we were thinking about this session, we thought it was good for us to have a session with the author. Most of the time when you have these kinds of sessions, you just have the call, and then we propose deadlines and enforce deadlines. But then the opportunity to speak to the host, to hear from the host's mouth comes at the tail end. But we thought we should have it at an early stage, and hopefully have it again. So yeah, at this point, maybe Nchiko can come in and then Babatunde will begin.
Oh yeah, hi everyone. Good morning. Yeah, good evening. Like to really like some of us, depending on where you're joining us from. Yeah, my name is Nchiko, and I'm also like part of the team that is trying to put this together. That being like Sydney and Diana. Really like I guess some fair work so far, and we really hope to see this like all the way to completion. And nothing is going to be really like possible without your contributions. So it's quite encouraging to see that you could actually like join the call, particularly at this particular hour. Yeah, I guess that's really it from me. But some of the things that we just wanted to know, maybe to start with, like Prof, is like just the key message of the book, at least like, and then from there, I think like the prospective like authors, contributors to the symposium, if you have like any point of clarification that you need to bring up, you can also just like bring it up. But there was also something that was a bit, I think, disturbing, Mwalimu Babatunde, because I'm actually saying, no, we are saying Fagbayibo's supranationalism. It's like this is his thing. It's very like subjective, and he has not been like quite receptive of that. So maybe you can also just like comment on that, and then we'll just open it to everyone. There's not really like proper format. It is to essentially just meet the author and ask anything that might be like disturbing you or that you might be thinking about. Yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. Over to you, Mwalimu.
Thank you to the organizers, the triumph, the trio, and also for those who have contributed to the symposium. I've not seen anything. I've not seen any of the contributions, so I'm looking forward to seeing them. Yes. And Chico had said something about, I'd raised it with him saying, Fagbayibo supranationalism sounds a bit, it's not something I embraced because I did not invent the term supranationalism. I just proffered my own explanation of what I think is Afro-supranationalism, or the way supranationalism is being practiced on the continent, and to kind of I see Faith here to put you in the spotlight. She was in my office yesterday, and we're talking about some of these ideas, right? Some of the views about supranationalism, at least as it applies to the continental free trade area. So, we see elements of supranationalism in many of the things we're doing on the continent. And I'm always amazed by both the official kind of supranationalism, things that are stated in documents and, in theories, and, and all of those things. I'm even more interested in the practice, right? Because at times when African states engage in regionalism, they do not necessarily set out to practice or to kind of bring about supranationalism. So I tend to look at the practice and some of the issues that emerge from the practice between and among African states, and how they're able to do that. So in any case, to just I don't really want to kind of hug the time here. So I would like to first start to to explain what brought me to the book. So two things brought me to the book: a thesis I had written and finalized in 2010, and of course, since writing that thesis, I've been writing articles and all of those things and thinking about supranationalism on the African continent. And of course, there was a book chapter which I then wrote in 2018, which again was like the most immediate thing that stimulated, that sparked it. Looking at, and the book chapter again essentially looked at whether or not Africa can achieve some sort of unity, and I looked at the ways in which we can, kind of achieve that kind of unity, and that actually sparked the interest, saying, yes, this is a thesis that is there that I've been thinking about writing, and this is a chapter I've written, and perhaps some sort of linkage or some sort of linkages between that chapter and the book, and of course, and the thesis, and of course, then started writing the book. And for me, the basis of my idea on supranationalism, the starting point for me, is what I call the worldview. The Pan-African worldview. I think it was Nyerere who had said it in 1969 at a speech he delivered in Canada, that it is good to understand the world, but if you are trying to, it is good to engage with the world. But if you are engaging with the world without understanding it, it is extremely dangerous. And I see that a lot in the way our leaders engage with external partners, and of course, even the way the institutions they've set up even engage with us. Very few people understand the African Union. I mean, don't even go to the supranationalism part of it, just the African Union as an institution. Very few Africans understand what it is. There's not enough awareness. And one of the questions I've asked in another article I'd written, perhaps maybe 2015, 2016, was that, what is the link between transnational identity and the success of regional integration in Africa? And there was a survey done in East Africa then in 2008 or so, and where many East Africans had actually said the reason why they support East African Federation is because, or the East African integration, is because of the things they materially benefit from the East African integration. In fact, they mentioned free movement. They mentioned the ability to so that kind of material benefit from it. So, and that actually has a fundamental, it's very important. It has serious linkages with the way we see supranationalism on the continent. So I started, it has to be centered in that worldview, because we need to refine and reframe that worldview. Without refining and reframing the worldview, there's no way we can, set up any serious supranational institutions. Because it is from understanding that worldview, then we start to ask ourselves serious questions. How do we engage with the world? What kind of institutions do we want? Yes, supranationalism is good, but we need to contextualize it, right? Understand it within the context of the continent, and building from there. And I know I was talking about making fun of the Kenyan president now, saying he's been, saying all the right things and all of those things. And the question is the actions, right? So he's saying in fact, many of the things he's been saying, Mr. Ruto has been saying, is actually supranationalism. I mean, he has not said it. I mean, he has not, kind of said, oh, I'm talking about supranationalism, but he's saying we are not funding the African Union, for example. If we are not funding it, then it's not able to assert itself. We cannot negotiate as one unit. We are not, saying all of those things. And, we know all of those things. But the next question is, how do we come back to ourselves and set up, reinforce those institutions so that they're able to produce the kinds of things we need. And for me, I believe that the first thing we need to do. So I looked at 3 circles, right? 3 concentric circles, 3 circles essentially, saying first is the internal dimension of it. That is where we need to refine and kind of capacitate our institutions. And there are various ways in which we can capacitate our institutions. I think one of the mistakes we make, many of our leaders make, and even policymakers make, is that we place too much emphasis on, creating documents and institutions, multiplication of documents and institutions, without understanding the quality of those things. So, and also expecting, perhaps in the spirit of African, Pan-African unity, that we can all be on the same page. No, we will not all be on the same page. That's a reality. And I was saying it the other day in one of my classes. I said, if you're expecting all the 55 African states to be on one page, then there will be snowfall in Kinshasa. And one of my students had said, no, bro, there's climate change now. There might be snowfall in Kinshasa, so maybe you should use a different kind of analogy. So, but anyways, until there's snowfall in Kinshasa, but let's but that's the thing. So we, not all member states will be on the same page. So we need to start walking around flexibility approaches to get to where we are going. Play with ideas, coalition of the willing. Okay, in terms of free movement of persons, I'm busy with the research now on how we can implement continental free movement in Africa, because as you guys know, only 4 countries have signed to it. And some countries like South Africa have already said it from the get-go that they will never sign to it. So, and of course, given all sorts of conditions and all of those things. And I'm saying, if we are dealing with that already, there's a possibility that we will not get the 15 countries that will make it, a normative document. So we can look for coalition of the willing in terms of agreeing, in terms of moving forward. Of course, in terms of trade as well. And I'm very, very glad I was, of course, I'll go back to Faith again. Like, I'm seeing the things young Africans are doing in terms of thinking about these things. We have these ideas, and maybe many will not look at it from a supranational perspective, but exactly what they're doing essentially is supranationalism, saying we need to get to that point, but we cannot go there with a 55 member state. So what kind of frameworks can we build to get to where we're going? So internal dynamics is very, very important. Refine our institutions, make the African Union Commission more powerful, make it more transparent, because we can't be funding it without expecting accountability. Give more powers to the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. 75% of its judgments are not adhered to. And that's a serious indictment on member states. And just do all of those things, right? Then the second element is the external dynamics. Now, that external dynamics is how we deal with the rest. Because if we don't understand ourselves, we cannot deal with the rest, right? And that's the mistake we keep making. So we keep, making all these things, and part of dealing with the rest is also understanding that the supranational project cannot be solely funded. We cannot outsource it. We cannot outsource it. He who feeds you controls you, and that's what Thomas Sankara said. You can't outsource it. At some point, and as I hinted at in the book and in other works, at some point we need to sit down with the European Union and stop this funding. We do, short, medium, long-term project so that this funding is stopped. And also capacitating ourselves in ways in which we can negotiate better with the rest, and negotiating as a team. I mean, we are not, we keep dilly-dallying on it. Today, there's this, look, Carlos Lopez was appointed as the High Representative, AU High Representative, on capacitating member states to negotiate. I think his term of office has expired now, I'm not so sure. But the thing is that we've been talking about it, but common African position on some of these things are still lacking. Then the third one is, what I call strategic hybridization, kind of syncretic approach, where you merge both the internal and the external element in in order to get what we want, in order to, and I'd mentioned, for example, studying the rest. We are the object of study. We need to study the rest. We need to study those who we are dealing with. And I'm very glad we have, for example, in South Africa now, we have at least 2 centers for the study of the United States. One at my university, headed by Professor Sike, and the other one at the Witwatersrand University. We need to study the rest, to understand who we're dealing with. We cannot just be the object of study. And we need to kind of also see ways in which we teach, kind of teach look, how many African universities are teaching the African Union, for example? It starts from somewhere. We need to start from somewhere. In European universities, there's no way you can study law in European universities and not have studied European Union law. And one of the things, I'm trying to push for at the University of Pretoria now is to have an undergraduate degree, undergraduate module on the African Union law. University of Namibia already has that. A very good one. I've seen the syllabus, and I'm sure maybe some other universities are, but we need to make it, essentially compulsory, so that people, at least, we, as Asante, SKB Asante had said in '97 that we need to create food soldiers. He even suggested that we need to start teaching it from creche, from nursery and primary school, straight to the university, so that at least we understand, where we're going, and involving civil society as well. Civil society needs to come on board. And when I'm talking about civil society, because I'm also very critical of civil society, I'm not only talking about organized civil society. We need a broad-based civil society movement, because one thing we have also learned is that organized civil society at times, I know I don't want to bash civil society. I've said it in many forums that I'm not a fan of ECOSOC, but anyways, that's a debate for another day. But again, we need a broad-based civil society. We need things like this, things you guys are doing. We need this kinds of engagement, a network of young Africans speaking to each other, a network of African scholars speaking to each other, like the paper myself and Nchiko are going to be presenting in Ghana in the next couple of weeks. Again, in terms of legal education, for example, what exactly, how are we teaching, or kind of mainstreaming the ideas of African Union and continental free trade area into legal education? So those 3 elements, which they kind of they are conjoined, so to speak. So those are the 3 elements on which I've built the idea of or what I call Afro supranationalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for that outline. I think, first of all, he's also helped, in case you've not managed to complete the book yet, he's given us a very good outline of what the content of the book is. I think some of the things that I picked up from his conversation is the ideas of context. I think he talked about within the context of Africa, does the rhetoric match the action on the ground? That's a very important point, because we see it in our different countries. We have the privilege of being joined by people from different countries in this call, and so we are able to sort of reflect based on what our experience of our own country implementation of what the AU wants us to see is. At this point, I want to first say that we need to make note that there are people who are trying to join but have not been able to. We are working on the back end to see what's preventing them from being in the room. But for the people who are in the room, again, thank you for being here with us today. I think just one of the thoughts that I would want to pause to tune there, because I think he's given us a very good outline so far, is in the book. I think one of the concluding thoughts the book says is that we should think about the paradigms within which we're assessing the supranational status of the AU. And so when people ask us, from other continents, not only in Africa, but when people ask, should we judge the AU based on its own objectives, or should we judge it based on what we think an African Union should be, right? what would you say to this thought? Because I think the EU is judged based on what it set out as its objectives, and it tends to deliver them. But then in Africa, if we're unaware of what the objectives of the EU are anyway, we find that some people judge it based on what they think the EU should be able to do. So in your opinion, should we judge it based on what it should be doing, or based on what the objective it set itself? What are your thoughts?
Thank you for that question, and which is interesting because I think last week I was looking at that chapter again, just kind of reflecting again on that chapter and seeing how one could kind of develop it for other projects. Yes, so the first, I mean, if you're going to judge the AU, I think the first step or the first stage is to judge it based on its objectives. So based on its stated objectives, we shall be able to do this. It's Articles 3 and Articles 4 of the EU Constitutive Act. These are objectives. We will do this: governance and democratization, gender equality and all of those things. Yeah, you have to judge it based on that. Now, but again, while you're judging it on that, right, then you start beginning to see that, oh, it falls short of this, it falls short of that. But in the book, I had said we should also be very careful. Yes, we can judge it harshly for having failed to meet its objectives, its stated objectives. Yeah, I mean that's a very, that's standard principle, be it from political science or from kind of a legal perspective, from international law perspective, or whichever way you want to look at it, or even from an economic perspective, political economic perspective, right? Yes, fair enough. But we must also not be blind to its achievements, or we must also not be blind to some of the practices that has emerged from the AU that has actually changed the course of certain realities on the continent. And I think those things should actually be factored into our assessment of the African Union. For example, there's no way we can judge the African Union, right? Judge its institutional weaknesses and all of those things, and not kind of pause and clap for it a bit for what it did through the Africa CDC during COVID. I mean, there's no way. It has set some sort of practice, some sort of standard in terms of public health order, order on the continent. And with the very little resources the Africa CDC had, of which we had, myself and another colleague had worked on that to see what, even by just working on the Africa CDC alone, we could extrapolate certain lessons for African Union supranationalism, just looking at Africa CDC. We can also not be blind to the fact that even in terms of gender equality, the African Court of Justice and Human Rights in Arusha is the most gendered, balanced international court in the world. 60% of its of the judges are women. Are we not going to, kind of give it some kudos for that? Now the commissioners, 6 commissioners, the AU has stated it very clearly. Out of the 6 commissioners of the African Union Commission, 3, at the very least, 3 must be women. At the very least. So meaning that if you don't have 3 women, we cannot compose all of those things. So it's been able to also mainstream some of these issues. And even in terms of governance as well, setting governance, yes, its rules have been flouted every day, by many African leaders. And we can, if we start counting now, the African leaders who are flouting those rules. In fact, some of your MCMs are actually flouting the rules every day. The president we all clap for, and that shall not be named, flouting the rules every day and, getting away with it, and, and all of those things. But at least the AU comes to the fore and says, oh, no, you violated these rules. Okay, there will be sanctions and all of those things. So these are agenda setting, practice setting standards that we have. So if we look at it holistically, has it not met its target? Yeah, of course it has not met its target. That is why we are here. But are there good things, good practices that we can, kind of take from it and be able to sharpen, the AU? Of course, those are some of the things, and we should actually point to that. So for me, I think that we should be more nuanced and more holistic in our assessment of the African Union. Yes.
Thank you, Tunde. Judy, please go ahead. I see you've raised your hand.
To clarify something, did you say that we don't have to move as 55, 54 countries? We would work even as 15 member countries who are interested in working? Because we had a conversation, I think last week, that Adesina, you remember, when he was the CEO of AfDB. So the conversation was that when he was reading the speech during, like, when the president of Nigeria was taking over, his 10-page speech had nothing on AfCFTA. Like, it was more focused on domestic production. So we have this, and Nigeria, we know, is like one of the largest populous countries. It has a huge economy that would contribute to the success of the AU. So I'm wondering if these big countries like Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, or even Kenya said, "Oh, this thing, you're not going to embrace it because, I mean, they are focusing on, especially during COVID, countries are looking inward. If we say that we don't need all the countries to speak together as one, and we have a few, but we have these big economies in Africa, like, not willing to take these up. Is it possible that the small economies might not be able to have the muscle to make things work? Yeah, that is what I wanted to hear.
Thanks, Judy, for that question. Yeah, so yes. So I think your questions are in two parts, right? And you correct me if I'm wrong. The first is that it's very important for regional hegemons to take the lead. Extremely important, right? No regional integration effort on the face of this planet has ever worked without, the so-called, leading economies taking charge, carrying everything on their back, and think of how even in the early stages of the AU, before the reforms or financial reforms, where just 5 countries were paying 75% of the budget of the African Union. So those are very important things to take into account. And it's always very important because remember, when these big leaders, I mean, the big economies, what in political science, what you call them, the regional hegemons, when they kind of signal it, because they have the money, they have the capability, they have the resources, they're able to shape the agenda, they're able to kind of convince other people, they're even able to go back to their sub-regional organs, right, to say these are the things we want. For example, if you want AfCFTA to work, for example, in ECOWAS, Nigeria has to take the lead. Nigeria has to set the tone, right? If you want AfCFTA to work in SADC, South Africa has to take the lead, because many people would, for example, when South Africa spoke about we are not going to sign the continental the free movement of persons. When South Africa signaled that, many quite a few countries in SADC actually lined behind South Africa and be like, oh yeah, we agree, that's a SADC position. So it's very important that we do that regional hegemons take the lead. And I think they're not doing enough, as a matter of fact. I don't think, look, there's a lot of things that one could say about regional hegemons not coming to the table in terms of taking the lead and showing the kind of necessary thing. I was talking about Ruto now, for example. If, for example, President Ruto could say, okay, no problem, all these things we are talking about, we don't give the African Union enough powers and everything. President Ruto could say, listen, this is Kenya, a big economy, a relatively big economy, one of the biggest economies in East Africa. I think it's is it still the biggest economy in East Africa? Kenya? It's still the biggest economy, right? And the most industrialized. Could say, listen, this is how we want to support the African Union. right? This is how we want to contribute to the African Union, not even in terms of finances. For example, to say the free movement of persons, for example, we're going to sign it. Kenya will sign it immediately by just symbolism matters. By signing that, you're showing confidence, some sort of confidence in the project, and also boosting the morale, the behavioral kind of attitude of the rest. So when I talk about a group of countries working together to achieve certain objectives, I'm also mindful of the fact that we need a Pan-African project. We cannot work in silos. We cannot be divisive about it. But this is the hand fate has dealt us, right? We're here. We are not agreeing on things. Beyond just signing documents, we're not agreeing on most things, right? We're not agreeing on, for example, and I keep going back to because I'm doing some work on the free movement of persons. We're not agreeing on that, on free movement of persons, that we should have a continental free movement. Why is it that only 4 countries? This is the same agreement that was signed on the same day as AfCFTA, by the way, in case we have forgotten. It was signed on the same day as AfCFTA. In fact, the idea was for them to be like twins, right? They were twins. These are twins. Like they are literally like Siamese twins. But what African leaders decided to do was to engage in an operation and kind of separated the Siamese twins, right? And said, no, we prefer this other one. This one has more life. You see this one, let's keep it in ICU. That's what they've done. They've left it there. Nobody's talking about it. Only 4 countries are signing. Many African countries have been signaling their, disapproval of it or whatever. Maybe not disapproval, but like unwillingness. So think of this scenario. And I recommended this scenario as far back as 2015 in an article I had written on free movement of persons. That was before the consent free trade. We had the free movement program. I said, think of this scenario of moving the the free movement of persons FMP protocol forward. ECOWAS already has a passport for its citizens, for 15 African countries. Created some sort of supranational free movement framework, right? Which is relatively successful. Yeah, there's still hiccups here and there. People are stopped. People ask for a bribe. People do all it, but it's fine. But the reality is that there have been court cases where the ECOWAS Court of Justice, just like the East African Court of Justice has said, the laws of ECOWAS in terms of movement of persons trumps the laws of member states. You cannot deny. That is why me going to Ghana on the 20th, Ghanaian authorities cannot deny me an entrance because I have an ECOWAS passport. Now, that's ECOWAS with its 15 member states. Think of EAC with now its 7 member states, right? It also has a passport. It has, in fact, in terms of the index on mobility, it's actually higher than ECOWAS. Think of both creating a mega project within the context of the African Union on free movement. Do you know how many countries we have there? We have 15 plus 7, 23 out of 55. Now, you're beginning to see how we can move things. Now, that fast tracks it. Instead of us sitting there here and crying every day like, oh, we only have 4, oh my God, isms, we have Ruto crying on the, sorry for picking on Ruto, crying on the world stage like, oh, we are not moving things forward. But at least we can say that 45% of EU member states are now implementing the free movement protocol. If the rest want to join, it is fine. You can join, but at least 23, my math is not very good. Yeah, 23. 23 is better than 4 that have signed and have not even started. Right? So those are things we should start thinking about. And of course, there are many other examples I can give, but again, I know there's some research that are still ongoing with some of you in the room, and you might not be happy about me sharing it on this platform. But there are many other issues, many other projects we could look at, and in terms of moving things forward, it's very important that we do that. Thanks. Oh, Judy, have I answered or?
You have. Yes, you have.
Oh, thank you.
Faith, you can go ahead. I see your hand was up.
Oh, yeah. Faith, yeah.
I was turning on my mic. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. So I feel like this conversation is very familiar. I don't know if you mentioned it in class or it came up somewhere in our conversations. But the first question is about the point that you were talking about external dynamics. And you kind of mentioned that the EU has to stop funding. And it reminded me of a conversation where you brought it up and termed it as Africa has to gain dignity. African states have to gain dignity. And it still takes me back. I want to ask you this question. Do you think we are really at a position where we have to cut off all funding? Or is this something that is, it's going to happen with time? Because you went ahead and said that members have to be capacitated to negotiate. And it still, it still takes me back to why do we have to demonize funding so much? It's a whole discussion, this, but why do we have to constantly demonize funding? Why not, grow Africa, let it grow, let it develop with whatever funding is coming in, so that the question of stopping the funding does not have to be an immediate need that Africa has to address right now. So that's the first question. The second question would probably hint to whatever project that we were talking about yesterday. So I don't know how far it will get, but I'm trying to understand, is the concept of supranationalism pushing for variable geometry than multiple speed, like you explained? So how I'm understanding this is you're saying that, for example, the last example that you used, you're saying that the EAC and the ECOWAS can come together. And if they're coming together, they're literally forming another regional economic community or another regional trade arrangement. Whatever sort of thing is going to come out of a FTA or a customs union, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to expand the spaghetti ball effect that we already have and that the AfCFTA is trying to solve? Or we are trying to, I don't understand what supranationalism is trying to do by doing that when you say, let's have another 27. I mean, the AfCFTA is really trying to harmonize what we have right now. And I think if maybe we would have supranationalism pushing for AfCFTA rather than pushing for a hegemony states like Kenya or Nigeria trying to do all of that, we're expanding that spaghetti ball effect. And it's not really helping because we're going to have more and more customs unions here in place, and it's not really helping the concept of pushing towards having one powerful organization or institution supervising everything that is happening. I hope you really understand my question, because according to me, I don't think it's aligning with the spirit of the AU in terms of accelerating implementation of the AfCFTA. If anything, it's derailing what the AfCFTA is trying to do.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, of course, I disagree with you completely, but I think it will become more apparent when that paper of ours, it becomes, since you've actually put it on the table now. So now, remember the example I gave was on free movement of persons, not trade, right? We'll talk about the trade one. So let me explain what I mean by this. You see, even if you look at all the normative documents of the African Union, the Free Movement Protocol, the AfCFTA as well, which you and I were looking at in my office yesterday, it actually includes the principle of variable geometry, right? Includes the principles of flexibility, because it understands that, yes, at some point we will have to harmonize all the structures. Remember, regional economic communities are a reality that we cannot wish away. The hope is that they will get to a point where we can harmonize their structures. While we are waiting for that, right, understanding all the challenges we have, right, for example, in terms of free movement, we can say to ourselves that what are the objectives, for example, of free movement of persons in Africa? Ask yourself, what are the objectives? The objectives are like, okay, you allow this person to come in, but of course, nobody can just walk in willy-nilly. You have to check security, you have to do that. You allow people to just, kind of, those are the objectives, right? Now, you are saying to yourself that if these two regional economic communities wish to create some sort of a mega project, they cannot do it outside of the AU context. So meaning it's just that they are doing it on behalf of the African Union. Now, yes, in name, it is an EAC ECOWAS project or EAC ECOWAS thing, but it is supervised, regulated, and measured by the African Union. So the African Union still has some control over it. In fact, the African Union could even go to the extent of saying, EAC, ECOWAS, sign these things, right? That the moment you start implementing it, you are implementing it in the name of the African Union. That anybody else can still join you if they want to join. So meaning if a country like, I don't know, Comoros, for example, says, oh, we like what EAC and ECOWAS is doing. You know where they go to first? They go to Addis Ababa. They don't go to Abuja or Arusha. They go to Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa will be like, okay, that's very interesting. Now, we have a framework. They call ECOWAS, they call EAC. They say, this is it. There's a country that is outside of your union that wants to join. How can we bring them into the picture? Both says, okay, now, fine. The more the merrier. Let's make it 24, right? So it becomes a nucleus. It does not work in parallel. It is a nucleus of saying we need to get where we are going to. How do we fast track it? Not creating parallels. You see, and I was explaining to Faith in my office yesterday that the mistake we make is that when we are defining variable geometry, we don't understand. People just say variable geometry without understanding that there's variable geometry and there's multiple speed. Variable geometry essentially means that you can work outside of the organizational parameters. And that was how Schengen started, right? In the 80s. So Schengen was working essentially outside of the EU until the EU brought it in. But my suggestion to the African Union, and I've done that in a couple of my writings, is that you cannot afford variable geometry. Because if you tell people to operate outside of your organizational framework, then they start a parallel project. Nobody wants to come back. People will be like, oh no, we're not, we're doing way better where we are. But you make it a point of duty to say it must be a multiple speed approach. Multiple speed is the same as variable geometry, but the only difference is that multiple speed is done within the organizational framework. So AfCFTA, for example, AfCFTA talks about variable geometry, but what AfCFTA is saying, what the policymakers are actually saying is multiple speed. They also understand that you can't afford people to just go willy-nilly and do whatever they like. AfCFTA must still supervise. The secretariat in Accra must still say, oh yeah, you guys want to fast track this. Oh yeah, please bring your documents to Accra and let us see it. See whether it aligns. If it doesn't align, we tell you, and things like that. So that's exactly what one example with the free movement of persons. Then I go to your first question, and I know we had a long debate in class. My God, it's some of the, I think Faith was also part of those who disagreed with me vehemently on my proposition. And what I said was that, look, yes, one is also not naive to say we stop the funding today. All I'm saying is this. You see, when you think of people funding you, right, it strikes at the heart of dignity. It's a dignificatory project. I can't be funding you and you telling me that I cannot tell you what to do and how to do it. And we've all seen it. Look, they're all documents are there. And I've also shared a document with the class, Faith's class there, TILA, a fresh document written by Europeans to essentially show how the EU bullies the African Union with its funding. This was not even written by Africans, by the way. So if you're saying it was Fagbayibo who wrote it, of course, I've written something like that in the past. People could say, oh, yeah, he's being dramatic. Oh, yeah. You know, these Africans would just like isms and all of those things, and they don't never do anything. But Europeans, Frederick Soderboom and Soren Staple, wrote an article that just came out, not even a month, to call the way the EU uses its funding as bullying. That's the title. In fact, it was in the title of the article. So they've already said it. Before that report, there was an international crisis group report of 2017 that also shows the extent to which the the European Union uses its funds to bully the African Union. These are realities we cannot ignore. You know, so now the next question we need to ask ourselves is this. So how do we get out of the logjam? Should we say, oh yeah, please keep on giving us the money, but don't tell us what to do with it? No, you can't do that. European taxpayers will ask at some point, why are you not asking questions? What, you know, and there's a way in which we can still engage in this arrangement. Yeah, and we're not saying these projects cannot be funded, but funded on the terms of, you know, kind of equal players. Understanding that you don't treat the African Union. So, you know, someone was telling me I think last year, that the European Union was very shocked at the last EU summit that African Union actually had an agenda. They were so used to the fact that they don't come to the table with serious agenda. You know, they were shocked, like, what? You know? But you see, that again shows you the psychology of this. You know, when we look at the funding, you have to look at it just beyond the, oh yeah, if they don't give us money, we're all going to die in that village. Or if they don't give us money, oh yeah, the roads will not be built. We will not drink water. You know, look at it beyond that and understand it in a very holistic context. Understand the psychology of it. If you give people money and you're like, I mean, at some point, the African Union officials were even saying it, that, you know, the way the EU treats us, they give us a few thousands of pounds of euro, then they make us write 100-page report about it, you know, and all of those things. And you see, we can sit down here and talk about all of this, but what I'm saying is that at some point, the EU has started, right? Of course, we are not getting to where we want to go to, but the EU has already started through its reforms and saying we need to claw back, right? We need to control our strategy. We need to create what they call the EU Peace Fund, which is now, I think it's now 400 million US dollars. Yes, it's now about 400 million US dollars. Is, you know, as at the last time I checked, 400 million US dollars. Saying we need to put more money into our peace fund so that we can fund our own projects and all of those things, right? I mean, the OAU was not funded. What are we talking about? The OAU as an organization was not funded. Funding only started when the AU were in. So we need to also kind of come to the point where we say to ourselves, we cut our cloth according to our cloth. You know, they say don't no longer say according to your size, because you might not even be able to afford your size. You cut it according to your cloth, right? So those are the things we need to do. And that's why I said there should be short-term, medium-term, and long-term project for eventually, you know, something, you know, kind of, you know, I'm not sure whether Faith, you know, you can always, it's fine, we're in the same institution. If you don't, when you see me walking into the office, you can stop me and say, listen, we need to continue the fight offline.
But not at lunchtime. Maybe it might spoil the appetite if you're eating and then somebody comes with an attack. But thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I see Martin has a question. Martin,
yes.
you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I actually have two questions, and they arise from two of the triptych analysis approaches that are proposed by Prof on the feasibility of effective supranationalism in Africa. Of course, one about the internal issues, and then the other one about the external dynamics. So I'll begin with the one about the internal dynamics. When you refer to capacitation of institutions and making them more powerful and accountable, do you refer to the regional economic blocks, or do you refer to the institutions within the African Union as established under the organization? I just need a clarification. That's that I asked my question.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So I refer to capacitating AU institutions. Remember, even there, I also said, how do we capacitate the AU institution? Remember, part of the pillars. Remember, there were 4 pillars under the internal dynamics. The last pillar that I looked at, maybe second to the last, but one of the pillars, was national institutions, right? It's very important that we capacitate, because remember, this is how it works in regional integration. It's about the supply and demand dynamic. So it's a 2-level game. But in Africa, it's almost like a 3-level game. But let's just look at it as a 2-level game. The demand section, right? And this, I mean, it was a Moravsik and Putnam came up with this whole analysis of a 2-level game. The demand aspect of regional integration starts at the national level, right? So many forces, many players, business organizations, right? Student movement, women movement, and all of those things start demanding certain, issues, right? They start demanding, and this demand becomes some sort of strategy that is now taken to the regional level, whether sub-regional level or continental level, and debates start, right? Now, once this is agreed upon, right? So we expect now this institution at the continental level to supply. They now supply the functions, isn't it? That's why we're saying the AU is not supplying. Remember, many of our criticisms about the AU is the supply. It is not. The supply chain is problematic. It is not supplying. We've demanded, right? The demands have been formed. We have it in the Constitutive Act. We have it in AfCFTA. We have it in so and so. So it is not supplying. Now, remember, even in terms of the supply chain, think of it like this. The supply chain is that the AU, the powerful AU, still relies on the national government to function, isn't it? The AU has no army. AU has no police, right? So we're talking about the 0.2% tax. Well, how do we collect it? You rely on customs at the national level. You rely on customs to collect, or your tax revenue organizations, they collect, right? And they forward it to national government, who forwards it to the African Union, or the reserve banks, for example. Reserve banks and central banks and all of those things. Those are national institutions. And I'll give you another example of, at some point, there was a report in 2019 or 2018, I can't remember, that the Nigerian customs, the Nigerian customs only remit 10% of the profit made from the ports or from the taxes to the national government. So 90% just disappears in corruption. Now, if the AU, for example, wants 0.2% from Nigeria, you can see that it's even getting less, because it's only getting 0.2 of 10%, whereas it should be getting 0.2 of 100%, isn't it? So, and that tells you a lot about why we need to capacitate national institutions. They are the ones you see. They are the ones who stand by you're flying from one country to the other, you get to the immigration. They're the ones who are there. They're the ones who implement some of these rules. So it's very important that we capacitate them. Of course, again, we have to look at it holistically, as I always say. The AU can also rely on the EAC, for example, on the strengths of the EAC, on the strength of ECOWAS in certain realities or in certain sectors, and be able to, to learn its lessons, or to learn some lessons on how to implement continental integration.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Now to my question, which relates now to one of the mechanisms that you have there is bottom-up regionalism, and I believe this is a part that now talks about the use of regional economic communities now to help spur, or rather begin the whole idea. So you talk about taking a coalition of willing approach, and I got the difference when you explained the difference between variable geometry and the multiple speed approach. But now my question is, what about the problems that we still have within these regional economic communities? Because even the regional economic communities themselves have not been able to achieve, free movement of goods, trade, and this has been for a couple of years, even including something as just having one customs union, having a common market. There's still problems bedeviling these regional economic communities that you expect to start us off with, this coalition of the willing approach and all that. What are the deeper problems bedeviling these regional economic communities, and how do we solve those first so that the communities themselves are united? And then now maybe we start with what I have seen you propose, like the tripartite free trade area, where we're seeing that now communities can come together, COMESA, EAC, because we also see countries very much overlapping within these regional economic communities. So first, what are the deeper problems within these communities? Why haven't as few as 6 countries, for example, in the EAC, been able to pass rules that make it easier for them to move very freely? And then how do we make this as a starting point now towards spurring trade within the continent?
Yeah, you look, there are common issues bedeviling the regional economic communities or sub-regional organs, right? So you have all sorts of, you have weak. So many of these countries have not even transferred enough powers to the organs. Many of the things they are doing at the AU, they're also doing it at the regional economic communities. Now, you see, but I prefer to take the pragmatic approach. If we want to sit down here and want to only look at the problems of regional economic communities, then it means we are not going to find a way forward, because we're just going to sit and be like, think of the Arab Maghreb Union. It's actually one of the least functioning of all the regional economic communities. They don't even meet. Algeria and Egypt cannot even stand each other. And so Algeria and Morocco cannot stand each other. Sorry, not Algeria and Morocco. They can't stand each other. They can't even be in the same. Now you want them to meet in a regional economic community. That's why AMU is not working. Look at the in Central African regional community. That is also not fun. In fact, that's where you have the highest use of visas across the continent. Now, yes, the problems bedeviling the African Union also bedevil these organizations. But for me, thinking about the pragmatic way is to say, if we can take up what we have, what is good, or what is, functioning in these organizations, we can always build on those things and be able to. And by doing that, there could be some sort of spillover effect. So, for example, if you, and that's why I keep going back to the whole idea of free movement of persons, just by having mega coalitions, right, you could expand it in such a way that you even help capacitate other sub-regional organizations that do not have a very strong free movement protocol, right? So these are some of the issues. I think there's just, look, the problems are way too many. They are way too many. But as the late Tajuddin Abdurrahman used to say, the great Pan-Africanist who died in 2008, used to say, he says, don't agonize, organize. That's what he always says. Don't agonize, organize. The problems are way too many. I mean, at some point, I used to sit down and be like, these things we never, all of those things. I used to be very, very critical and engage in bland criticisms of, kind of blanket criticism and all of those things. But I said, look, there are things that work. Why can't we build on things that work and use it to, kind of expand on it, and we kind of create some sort of laboratory experiments, right? We see, I mean, there are many things happening in the EAC, for example, that we could experiment with at the African Union level. And of course, because EAC has already done it, it has failed with it, it has faltered, it has refined it, then we say, oh, wow, let's extrapolate some lessons and think of peace and security. Think of what ECOMOG did in the early 90s. In terms of, maintaining peace in West Africa, how Nigeria, for example, bankrolled, spent about $6 billion without borrowing from anyone to ensure that there was peace in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Now we're going back to that idea. That idea formed the basis of what we're saying about, humanitarian intervention and all of those things. But the regional hegemon had already done that in the early 90s. And we've learned our lessons. I'm not saying that it was perfect, but at least both countries are peaceful now. If we're going to look at it from that perspective, and thinking of Sierra Leone and Liberia, that is. So we can learn lessons, and we should be more pragmatic in our engagement.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I guess we are somehow even like past time. Would really like love to continue this conversation, but then I guess that's the whole essence of having a symposium. Yeah, here it was just to really like just meet the author and to just try to get in his head a bit and to just like try to start like confirming some of the assumptions that we might be having. So in case you have like any like further questions, feel free to really like attack them in your own symposium contribution. But also Mwalimu Babatunde is always like very ready to attend like to any questions that you might have. You can just like email them to us, that being like Sydney, myself, and we'll make sure that the questions like really reach. Anyway, enjoy your time, and yeah, I'm personally looking forward to like reviewing your submissions. There's a recording of this, and it will be shared with everyone. Thank you, and yeah, bye.
Thank you very much, and you guys. Thanks again. I appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to reading the commentaries. Thank you. Good night.